Watch The Atheist Experience live Sundays at 4:30 p.m. Central. Visit tiny.cc/YTAXP and call into the show at 512-991-9242 or connect to the show online at tiny.cc/callaxp.
It's time to get sexy on Secular Sexuality.
Hello, and welcome to Secular Sexuality, the ACA show that always ends with an invitation to love yourself. I'm Christy Powell. My guest tonight is a licensed professional counselor and philosophy major with specialties in mindfulness and compassion-based therapies. Welcome, Callye Lawrence.
Hello. Thanks for having me. Very excited to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a topic I'm super excited to get into. And tonight we're going to be talking about the power of self-compassion, both in our loving relationships and our relationships with ourselves. So if you grew up in a culture of self-criticism and divine judgment, and I know you did, give us a call with your stories and questions. We're at 512-991-9242, or you can reach us at tiny.cc/callsex because the show is coming right now. All right. Well, that sound means that we are starting this week the same way we do every week with what's turning us on this week. Callye, super excited to introduce you to our audience. Really glad to have you here. But to start off with, what's got you turned on this week?
Oh, well, aside from Timothy Chalamet every day.
Every day.
Yeah, I would be happy to be abandoned in a desert with him anytime. No, but the Boiler Room DJ sets. So have you watched those before?
No, I haven't caught that. Is that on YouTube or where do we find those?
Yeah, it's on YouTube. I mean, I guess it's on like Boiler Room, whatever, like their website, but it's basically just different DJs having performances in different cities, and it could be like in someone's house or a venue or whatever, but they've got really great DJs. And so I've been watching the Nicholas Jar one. He's a really good musician, and it's just real groovy, real sexy. So just having that on repeat just to like get my body moving.
Yeah, I don't think
recommend.
about like YouTube when I think about like house music, but I love the idea.
Yeah, no, it's Boiler Room DJ sets are phenomenal for anyone wanting to bring a party into their own space. So highly recommend.
Very sexy. Perfect.
Yeah.
No, thanks for the recommendation. I usually don't get to do these unless it's just two of us. So I'm excited to mention the new Netflix film, The Power of the Dog. Really beautiful, beautiful movie that I'd encourage people to check out. But kind of in particular, what's got me excited about it is an article in Pink News with some interview questions with Benedict Cumberbatch, who stars in the film. He discusses the fact that he, as a straight man, plays a queer character. And I just feel like the dialogue is really beautiful. So often in this space, we get into like Scarlett Johansson says that she could play a tree and maybe we should cancel her. And I don't want to take on cancel culture writ large, but his comments really sort of highlight the nuance of some of these things about what it means to respect allyship and to respect representation, while also, discussing that in actors like private and personal sex life is not necessarily something that they should be expected to put on screen. It's just a very like detailed and interesting conversation. I'd really encourage people to check it out.
Very cool. I had not heard of that.
Yeah, it's a really, well, I shouldn't call it a fun movie because it is very much not that. It is a sad Western, but it's a good time. I dug it. But yeah, let's get into this conversation because I have to say this is a topic I am super excited about. When I saw you on another podcast and I knew that this was something that you were really familiar with, I was so excited that you took my email and that you're willing to talk to us tonight. So let's start off, I guess, with just how you found self-compassion or maybe compassion-based therapies as a therapist.
Yeah, well, I'd never heard of it. I feel like it's this kind of, it's having a moment right now, right?
Sure.
With all
Fair
of
to
like
say.
mental health, self-care stuff, and people are really like self-compassion, which is amazing. But I think people also only see like half the picture. They're just like, love yourself. And it's like, cool, but there's a lot more nuance, right?
Yeah.
And so,
Just the headlines.
yeah. So, but I hadn't, heard of it until past few years. So basically, like in undergrad, I got a degree in philosophy. So I feel like I was always like focused on, I don't know, the human condition, I guess, like just
Sure.
as an interest. And then existentialism kind of appealed to me and how we make meaning out of things. And so then I went to grad school, found out about mindfulness as like a thing, you know, and I was like, oh, this is okay. It's a thing. And there's like theories attached to it. You can like do therapy from this mindfulness model. And so within that, started learning about self-compassion, like from Kristen Neff and that stuff. And then realized there's like compassion focused therapy and, ways to apply it in that way. So that's kind of my journey, is mainly through the mindfulness lens and
Mm.
learning that there's like an actual approach to self-compassion.
Right. Yeah. That it's not just like these nice, like buzzwordy type of
Mhm.
phrases. It's not just a bunch of mantras. There's actually
Yeah.
like a little bit of a system and at least a theoretical framework that goes along with all that.
Yeah, because I think a lot of people get stuck too when they're like, "All right, I'm going to try self-compassion. That sounds great," and then they do it, and they're like, "Okay, I love myself. I'm going to be nice to myself," and then they feel that internal resistance, and so then there's like this "fuck you" battle going on where it's like, "Love yourself," and it's like, "No, but I'm horrible and don't deserve love," and it's like, "But you're supposed to," and it's like, "Well, I guess I'm a bad person because I don't know how to love myself either. Wow, I've really failed," and
Right.
so people like create more shame almost when they try to use self-compassion sometimes, because they see it as like it's like a bulldozer they're trying to use to like penetrate their soul. And it's just like, no,
Mm.
self-compassion is a practice. It's a relationship. It's a way we engage with ourselves. It's an offering, right? We offer ourselves compassion. However we receive that, that's okay. There's no demands being placed on us, right? But compassion shows up to continuously give us care. And even if we're like not in the mood to be loved, self-compassion says, well, I'm still here and I'm going to love you even if you are telling me to fuck off. Like you can't scare me.
You
Like
don't have to enjoy that love. You're just gonna get it.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So
I like to kind of start off by talking a little bit about that meta compassion idea,
mhm,
right? Of
mhm,
we can be compassionate about the fact that it's kind of hard to be self compassionate, particularly in a culture that hasn't
mhm,
really prepared us for it. But
mhm.
generally, what are some of like the hallmarks of this approach of compassion based therapies?
Yeah, well, a lot of it is, I mean, standard therapy stuff too, right? Of non-judgment and
Sure.
normalizing people's experience. So it's a lot of just creating that safety of like, you're not broken, right? You're not uniquely
Mm,
damaged. Like you are someone who is doing your best, and this is what it feels like to be a human who struggles in this world, which we can all relate to. So a lot of it is normalizing it so that you don't have to feel as alone or as broken. And then really looking at that like inner dialogue. So being really curious of like, how am I talking to myself in any given moment? What stuff do I continuously judge myself for? So I think in therapy, it's a lot of like trying to break that down and kind of be like, how are you approaching the feeling that you're having right now? Like, how are you reacting to this emotional state you're in? So it's just kind of exploring internal relationship. It's a
mm-hmm.
really relational, like attachment style thing too, because people with really low self-compassion usually have struggles with their own like disorganized or avoidant attachment, because to be close is very unsafe feeling. So of course they're going to have an unsafe feeling when they get too close to themselves. So self-compassion is really like getting in there and saying, how can you be the person you need to be for yourself? So it's a lot of just curiosity, non-judgment, and finding those moments where you're relating to yourself harshly and being like, what's going on there? So yeah. And there's like formalized practices where people can sit and, you know, meditate on things and whatever. But I see it as more of this informal thing that just as we're living our life, checking in with ourselves, like, how am I relating to my own feelings? How am I relating to this experience? What's coming up inside me? Am I pushing something away? Am I clinging to something too much? Like, what's going on. So I really like it as just this ongoing thing that we notice in our day-to-day life.
Yeah, and we'll talk about how these types of therapies can impact our relationships more
Mhm.
in a little bit. But I think
Mhm.
you're really highlighting an important piece here, that it's sort of the way that we connect, and it's the way we connect to ourselves. But then ultimately, that shows up in the way we relate to other people.
Yeah.
If you're an asshole to yourself, it's a lot harder to be like nice and generous and kind to the people around us.
Oh, yeah, totally. And it's people always have that, which I'm sure you've seen too, where it's like um, compassion, they can like give it to others, but not themselves, or like
Hmm.
there's usually some imbalance where it can flow in one direction more easily than the other, and a lot of times I think people they have a high capacity for being compassionate. We all do because we're wired to be that way. But they can give it to others because they're like, well, they're deserving of it. But then when they think about themselves, they're like, well, sure. I mean, I could give it to myself, but I know who I am. And if anyone really knew who I was, they'd see that I am garbage. And like, no one who's like me deserves it. No one who has all the sick thoughts that I have and the sad thoughts and the mean thoughts, like, no one like that would deserve it. But all these other people in my life, they're good people. And it's like, no, if you're bad, they're bad. Or if they're good,
Yeah.
you're good. Like we're all bad together. So I think people actually do have a pretty innate skill with compassion, and they just assume they don't deserve it. But it's like, oh no, you're already pretty good at doing it for other people. But like you do deserve it as well. No one else is more special than you. You just don't get to see all the stuff that they don't tell you.
Yeah, and even when folks who come out of religion kind of deconstruct these notions of like good versus evil and
Mhm.
taking every thought captive and all of those kinds of ideas, you do still see people tend to sort of believe themselves as being bad, as being like deserving of pain in a lot of
Mhm.
ways. And I really love this approach as a way of addressing that, of kind of working around that.
Yeah, we all share the exact same human experience. Maybe it's a different flavor for each person, but it's like we're all still eating the same food. And so if we feel something so wretched within ourselves, it's like that feeling couldn't even exist unless humans were capable of feeling it. So I think we get in our own heads of like, oh, I'm the like outlier. There's humanity and then there's the wrong side of it. And it's like, oh no, it's all in the same bucket. Like you wouldn't be able to have any of these thoughts and feelings you're having unless every other human could also be thinking and feeling the exact same way. Like you're not that special, you know?
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about, how these things work and what it actually looks like in our lives, but just from a like research standpoint, or just trying to understand this as a therapeutic approach, how do we know that these things work? Like how long has this been around, and how well researched or verified is any of this information?
Yeah, well, the unprofessional answer is it works because I've seen it work for myself, for other people, but I know
Sure.
that doesn't count. But there's, I think, a lot more research with mindfulness in the past few years, past decades has come about. So that's great that kind of mindfulness has come up, and self compassion is now part of that. So I can't point to like the studies, but there is just a lot of research out there talking about self compassion and its impact on things like trauma or relationships, and so
Hmm.
yeah, there's a lot of stuff that's looking at it and showing all these positive results because basically it's a way of building up a stronger safety system within yourself. And I mean, all research shows, like even our nervous system, right? We need one that's pretty well balanced and is, we don't want to be out of whack all the time. And self compassion is a way to get at regulating the nervous system, which creates a sense of safety. And when we're safe as people, then we thrive as people with ourselves, with other people in the world. So all the research, luckily, has been coming up lately because before it was kind of neglected. I feel like only like CBT or other theories like that would get the attention.
Hmm.
But luckily, there's been a lot more research in the past few years, and yeah, it's all showing how it helps in different psychological disorders and domains in our life.
Yeah, and I'll go ahead and remind the audience that in the show notes for this episode is a link to a page that has a good bit of that outcome data and some different meta-analysis put together to look at what we do know about the effects here. But a lot of it, a lot of those meta-analysis say what you're saying, Callye, which is that like a lot of the previous research has been done on mindfulness, and then there's been a fair amount on compassion-based therapies, and increasingly we're starting to finally put all of that together and see how effective they can be in tandem. And I'm incredibly excited about it. Like being here in Austin, a lot of that research is in particular coming out of the self-compassion laboratory at UT Austin, which I am, very, very desperate to get inside of someday.
You're just outside every day in the bushes, like, is it
Yeah.
my turn yet? I will break in.
But what are some of the like common criticisms or misconceptions about this kind of work?
Yeah, I think people, they like it in theory because again, it sounds nice to,
Mm.
be
Be
kind to
nice to
yourself.
yourself.
But one thing is it's like, oh, well, if I accept this, then I'm like condoning it or resigning
Mm,
to it, or like I'm not gonna grow. If I make a mistake, why should I like have acceptance and kindness towards myself for that? Don't I need to learn to
if I
do
don't
better?
beat myself up, how will I ever get
Yeah.
better?
Yeah, and it's an understandable thing, right? Like people wanna be growing, improving, they wanna be happy, and so it scares us, this idea of acceptance, because it's just like, "Well, fuck, now I'm just gonna stay this bad person that I believe myself to be." And it's not that at all. Compassion, it has accountability in it. So it's not this, like, has blinders where it's just like, "What? You're perfect. I love you. You're special. Wonderful. Don't change." Like like, it sees what's happening, and you're already suffering the consequence. I think people forget that too. Like suffering comes to us naturally. Like it's like the free space in bingo. Like you don't have to work at it. Like don't worry, it's always there. So we don't need to add on an extra layer to be like, did you see how that was bad? It's like, yeah, definitely saw it. So yeah, people just assume they'll stay stuck. But with self compassion, it's like, no, you deserve care because you're suffering, even if it's you did something wrong and it's your own fault. Like now you're suffering. I'm going to tend to that suffering. And also we can ask some questions and say, how do we work on that in the future? And it
Mm,
it focuses on motivation through care and love versus motivation through, fear, which at that point it's just obedience. It's not really, you're not a motivated person. People are like, well, I get all my stuff done because I'm terrified of what'll happen. It's like, oh, okay, so no, you're not motivated. You're terrified. Got it, got it. I mean, that
right.
works
Yeah.
for you. That's cool. But don't confuse that with like, I'm just so motivated when I'm hard on myself. It's like, no, you're terrified and you are obedient to that. And okay, so self compassion is like, it says you deserve care and love. And so if we come from that place of you're already enough, you're not bad, but I want you to be well, what are the choices you can make that will help you keep going in that direction? So it
Mm,
believes in your wholeness just as you are, that it's not this deficit model of like, prove that you're good enough. It's like, oh, you're already good, even when there are mistakes. And what is it that would serve you? What would be the next best thing for you? So it's like if you hate someone, you don't really want to help them that much, right? But if it's someone in your life that you
right.
like really love, and you're like, they're everything to me. Like you're gonna extend that extra effort because of how much you care for them. And so it's using that same type of motivation with ourselves. Like, oh wow, if I really love myself and want the best for myself, I want to make that happen. Versus like, I'm garbage. Fuck, I don't want the world to know I'm garbage. I gotta make another change
How
to
do I
keep running
beat
running from
myself into
this.
submission?
Yeah. So I,
Yeah,
I
I
like it
I
because it just
really
shifts
liked
it.
that.
Yeah. Mm,
For sure. I really liked the way you described that model of like we don't need to add a punishment in order to make ourselves into good people,
mhm.
because we're already going to suffer the natural consequences of things, and that punishment is just like an added burden of stress and anxiety that prevents us from achieving the thing that we're here to do in the first place.
Yeah, I love the analogy of like someone who's drowning, because some of the reason people don't like self compassion is like, yeah, I won't learn my lesson or won't be held accountable for my mistakes. And so if we imagine that someone accidentally swam out too far or something, and we see that they're drowning, right? Would you pause and be like, hold on, I'm going to yell at you for a minute and
Yeah.
say, how the fuck did you get out there? What's wrong with you? You knew you couldn't swim. Why are you out here? We need to talk through this. Prove to me that I should save you. It's like, we don't do that's crazy, right? We just realize, oh my God, they're struggling. How can I help save them? What can I do? And so you try and get help, try and rescue them. When they come back and they're actually safe, you get to have conversations of like, hey, what happened? Like what led to this? Do we need to practice, get some swim lessons? Like you can still do all of that work, but you don't want to make the depths of your sorrow your teachable moments, because you're not in a
Mm.
place where you can actually learn. So it's unfair because you're beating on yourself and you're not even receiving the message that you think you're trying to receive.
Yeah, and it just becomes like inwardly pointed violence and aggression, which we
Yeah.
just know is not going to be nearly as effective as
Hmm.
like trying to work with somebody.
Hmm.
I like to think about the like T-ball coach who, takes the little kid by the hand and is like, "Hey, if you just hold it a little bit differently, and if did you
Hmm.
get nervous, buddy?" And like
Yeah.
taking that kind of approach instead of just like, "You stupid little, why can't you pot?" Like that's not going
Hmm.
to lead to the development that you're looking for.
Yeah, like that kid walks up, they're like, I feel great about myself and I love this sport. No, they're like, fuck, get me home. Oh my God. Like, I don't want to get yelled at anymore.
Yeah, well, I
Mhm.
wanted to ask because I know that a lot of the people who are sort of at the forefront of this movement, folks like
Mhm.
Paul Gilbert and Tara Brach and Kristen Neff and Christopher Germer, like they're all drawing from personal experiences with engaged Buddhism, this sort of
Mhm.
like secular idea that Buddhism is a series of practices and not a religion. That's a debate for another show at another time. But I'm curious what skeptics should make of those roots or that sort of that history that some of these ideas maybe come from.
Yeah, I mean, I can get why it feels like icky coming from any religion, because it's just like, oh, here we go, just another way to use dogma or something to
Mm,
coerce people and take away our free will and brainwash or whatever. But I think if you look at the principles of Buddhism and of their experiences in particular, the core part is that in these practices, they're basically saying, I'm turning down the volume on all of these distortions that I have brought to this moment. So, all the filters that we have. So, to me, it doesn't really speak to anything too religious or supernatural or even highly spiritual. Like it's so pragmatic where it's just like, no, I'm going to look at exactly what is in front of me in this moment. I'm going to see something clearly for what it is and then go from there. So it's not really a practice that like puts you in a certain direction and says, and then you have to do this. But it's at the core, it's like sit and pay attention to what reality is,
mm.
embrace exactly what is without wanting it to be more or less, but just look at something clearly without all these different stories around it. So I think it's a really beautiful thing in that it's like trying to whittle it down to just the essence of we are alive. This is the moment I found myself in. Okay. Instead of all this other like junk that we pile on about, well, how do I feel about this moment? What's this moment say about this? And how did we get here? It's just like, no, this is what this is. Got it. Like it keeps it very matter of fact. So you're working from this more clean slate and you can have your own like self direction from there because it's actually coming from um, yeah, coming from this more pure place. Pure is kind of a weird word, but yeah. So I think the practice is really great for skeptical people, honestly, because it's saying we're getting rid of all the noise and we're just looking at the thing that is directly in front of you.
I think that that's a really great framework because there is a lot to be said about sort of the unchallenged assumptions and the different ways that we sort of avoid uncomfortable ideas and that like there's a necessary component here of acceptance, which means being like present with a thing and
Hmm.
seeing it as it actually is, which we're not going to want to do if we're terrified of that thing.
Yeah.
If we know that there's some aspect of our lives that we're not particularly succeeding in, and we're afraid that we're going to beat ourselves up over it, then we're not going to think about that thing. we're going to do
Mhm.
everything possible to avoid that idea. So this is not about like supernatural thinking. This is more like a more accurate way of seeing things anyway. Is that all fair to say?
Yeah, I love that because it's about total honesty with the moment and with your experience. And in therapy too, when you kind of ask like, what are the approach? What does that look like? I think therapy is a lot of confronting oneself, and self compassion is such an important part of that because we can't take personal responsibility for our lives if we are not willing to confront who we are and how we relate to ourselves in the world. And so I guess some of the Buddhism aspects they bring in, like that helps us be brave enough to say, I'm willing to look at exactly what is going on right now in this moment. And so I think from that place of bravery, then we actually get to be the empowered individuals that we want to be. Like if we're not willing to look at something clearly, I think we're under an actual trance. And you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, yeah,
so
absolutely.
that's actually more of the supernatural, like the altered state is the unwillingness to just embrace reality as it is.
No, that's a fair point. It very much does fall into that maxim that we love here at the ACA about believing as many true things as possible and ignoring or dismissing as many lies as possible. Like you're actually getting down to the meat of the thing.
Yeah, exactly. They're saying, what is instead of all this bullshit we bring or this resistance we have, like that shouldn't be it. It's like, okay, well, it is, but whatever you've got to tell yourself.
Sure. Well, we'll talk here in just a moment about how we can actually sort of apply these ideas to our lives and what it looks like to use some of these things to maybe cope with religious trauma or to
Mhm.
increase our connection to our partners and our loving relationships and things. But first, I want to remind folks that they can call into the show with their questions, their stories, their criticisms. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are. Again, we're at 512-991-9242. We'd love to hear your thoughts. But in the meantime, let's take a brief moment to see what's been going on around the rest of the ACA. Be the porn you want to see in the world
Yeah.
might be my new favorite catchphrase. I'm going to see if I can't get that done up on a t-shirt or whatever else.
Biblically, you have methodologically presupposed the divinity of our biblical Christological God within your start premise.
Biblically, I'm going to drop this call because biblically, I'm getting tired of this conversation.
Just because I have a penis or something doesn't mean that you could prescribe that I ought to not have long hair or I shouldn't paint my nails categorically.
You're a fertile field that we would love to plow.
Alex, Johnny wants to plow you, but he might need to plow you further in a different show.
I don't know what you missed in science class, but if you think that vaccines just don't work, then you are no longer in touch with reality.
I wonder if he believes in what the experts say about gravity, or is he jumping off buildings? I don't know.
All right, now I definitely need a T-shirt that says "Be the porn you want to see in the world." We're gonna have to work on that merchandising. But in the meantime, one of the things that makes these ideas so exciting to me is how they are so directly in contradiction to these sort of like shame-based models that we experience, particularly out of Christianity, but out of a lot of religions. And I guess I'm curious about how shame and guilt sort of factor into or contradict the self-compassion model.
Yeah, well, I mean, shame and guilt are normal human emotions for one. So that's a thing too, is like with self-compassion and any self-help journey or healing journey someone's on, like we can almost get caught up in this idea of destroying all the other unpleasant feelings. It's like, well, for me to be well means I don't feel shame and guilt. Like it's just this really healthy relationship. It's like, no, you're supposed to feel shame. There's an appropriate place for it. You're supposed to feel guilt. Like these are signals to alert you to like, hey, what's up? Let's check in. Now, when it's out of control and it's just like your home base, that lets you know, like, I think something's a bit off. I think maybe this
Yeah,
isn't
when it's been
so
like
wise.
weaponized against you and you
Yeah,
develop like a really unhealthy relationship with it.
exactly. So shame is going to be there. And self-compassion is the way to help move you through the shame that is there. So obviously trauma, religious stuff, like that's the main tool is, don't do anything wrong. You're going to die forever and God hates you and, all the worst possible things. But yeah, self-compassion's there to say, Ron, you're not doing anything wrong. Like we can't fail at life, to be clear. Like even to not survive just means, okay, and life is over. So there's no, like, we have to remind ourselves, we can't fail at this. We can struggle, but like you can't fail the world. The world can fail you, but you can't fail the world because you weren't built to carry the world, like you're just not the deciding factor. And so I think self-compassion is so important coming from religion too, because it's that counter message of you are good enough as you are, not because, oh, I see something so special in you and you've earned it and you've proven that you're great. It's like, no, you exist as a human being in this world who suffers and struggles and strives like everyone else. You are qualified, like you are born, therefore you've met our, those are the prerequisites. So self-compassion just has to keep being used to remind someone that, oh, hey, you're not broken. You're not wrong. Your struggling is a result of you trying to be well, for one, and even like, everyone with religion can have their own story of what it did to them, what that experience was like. But I think people can leave religion and then be so mad at themselves for the beliefs they held. Like ones that were like, but I was like all in, like they just feel like such bad people that they believed all these things that they realize are harmful. And it's like, oh, but even the part of you that believed all that, like you were trying so hard to be okay. Like what a beautiful thing that at that point in your life, that's what made the most sense to keep your world together. Like to go against those beliefs at any other stage would have felt like too much cognitive dissonance for you to maybe handle. So like you had to do what you had to do. And so I think kind of removing that shame too, of like the part people played for the ones that did really adopt those beliefs. And now we're questioning like, holy fuck, like if I, like I can't believe I got caught up in that. It's like you were trying so hard, and just to have so much love for yourself, because all of us are trying to be well. And we have these different things we turn to try and help us make sense of the world and feel at peace and that maybe we'll be loved. And if we came from a place where we don't know what love is like, and there's this other religion or community or deity that's like, I've got a path, even if it's a super fucked up path, like that's really appealing.
Yeah.
Like
tempting.
yeah, like, okay, I can get it. Like, that's not the dumb part of you or the what's wrong with you. It's just like, okay, that's what spoke to you. That's what you needed. You were moving towards what you needed. So my hope is that people realize like to have compassion for every little part. Because sometimes we want to have compassion for the good parts of ourselves, but we're like, but that other one, that's
what I want to reward.
Yeah, the other part let me down. I don't want to have compassion for that other weak part of me or something. It's like, no, that part is trying so hard to be okay, but people just have a hard time wanting to see that because they demonize themselves. So yeah, I just think always bring self-compassion as the antidote along the journey of the shame.
I like that notion of it as an antidote. I struggled through 4 semesters of Latin in college because I'm an idiot who didn't realize he lived in Texas. But I like being reminded that the root of that word compassion is just about being with the pain, right?
Yes.
Like it's not just the nice thing that you do for the nice parts of yourself. You actually go around looking for the issues. And even if those issues are small, like our white blood cells don't swim around our bloodstream looking for like big infections. They're just looking for any foreign body to attack. So they bring like repair and nurturance to the areas that need them, regardless of if it's like a big problem or a little problem or a problem you caused yourself or a problem that you deserve or any of those ideas.
That's such a great example because it's like compassion is there to tend to the suffering. That's it. There's not a hierarchy. There's not some parts you deserve it, some parts of you don't. It's just like, yep, this is what we do. Something struggling. Cool. I'm going to step in because you need to be held right now. You need to be supported. You need to be seen, whatever. And people with self-compassion, I know I can be the same way too when I practice it, is that we're like, yeah, I'm doing good. I'm being compassionate. But the second we start feeling like really bad about ourselves, we're like, well, fuck self-compassion. We've entered the darkness and there's no place for you here. It's like, no, that's where it comes to.
That's where it's supposed to be. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just remembering like it doesn't abandon us. Like, and it's not supposed to fix us. Like, I think of that with when people say like, I'm bad at meditating. It's like, what do you mean? Like, well, my mind wanders. Like, okay. And, it's like that you can't be bad at it. So you meditated. Cool. You succeeded. There's this idea of like, but I'm supposed to have a clear mind. And it only counts if like, there's no suffering and there's no thoughts in my head. And it's like, no, it didn't promise that. So same with self-compassion. It's not this like, this strategy that you just like Hail Mary at yourself of like, fuck, we feel really bad. Okay, I'm going to do self-compassion and I'm going to feel better, right? It's like, well, not necessarily, because some stuff doesn't get to just be fixed. We can't compassion away human nature, like there's suffering. It's hard to be a person. We're going to keep encountering it over and over again. And so we have to see compassion as this companion we bring with us that doesn't have any other agenda than I'm going to be with you in this moment. Not, I'm going to be with you and you're going to respond this way and then life's going to look this way and okay, cool. No, it's just going to be there. It doesn't abandon you. I think that's the important part, is there's a lot of self-abandonment that happens for all of us, like we don't like to look at parts of ourselves. So we're like, well, fuck you. All right, let's just go cry in a corner. And, but self-compassion is that presence that's like, I will not leave you. It doesn't matter what you do because there's no test here. Like, I'm not here because you earned it. I'm here because you're suffering. That's what my call is. When I see suffering, I show up. And so just kind of remembering, like, you have to keep letting it be there with you. It's supposed to be a presence. It's not going to just like make you cheery and happy all the time. Sometimes it will make you feel better pretty quickly, which is amazing. But it's a thing that you keep providing as this presence for yourself, because over time you start to realize like, oh, I'm seen and I'm held in this world. And that's just like a state you get to know. It's like if you go to a party or something and maybe you don't know anyone, but you have that like one friend, right? Maybe they're across the room. And it's like you have those moments where you look up and make eye contact. You're like, all right, I'm good. It's like maybe you feel uncomfortable the whole rest of the time, but when you remember they're there, or y'all can like laugh at something secretly that you hear someone else say, like it's so grounding, because you're like, yeah, I'm uncomfortable in this moment still. I still don't like any of these other people, but I know I'm not alone and that someone's got my back. And it's just that gentle presence. So same thing with self-compassion. It's like having this companion basically that's with us all the time. So even in difficult moments, we're like, oh, but yeah, I haven't been abandoned. I'm not alone. Like there's a way for me to be tended to and cared for no matter what's going on.
Yeah, so it really is a way of getting away from that sort of magical thinking of, if I do this, then everything will be better. And there's some sort of silver bullet. And I came to my therapist because I wanted to be fixed. This model says like you're not broken. You might be a little bit stuck. And we might not be able to really change that today, but we can offer some support. We can offer some nurturance and some kindness. And if that doesn't, quote, fix things, it's going to make it better, right?
Yeah, no, exactly. And because we can't outrun human suffering. The only way to stop suffering as a human is to not be alive anymore. Like this is the only way it works. Otherwise, you are alive. We're going to keep having these issues that come up, struggles. And so we need something that's there with us all the time, not just what's the thing so I can like get over this pain and be great. It's like we're not trying to be great. There's nowhere, we're not trying to ascend up to something, like, so we just need to have something, some resource where it helps us along this journey that will have continuous struggles.
Yeah. Well, is there a particular population, a particular type of client, a particular type of person that benefits from some of these philosophies or some of these techniques?
I'd say everyone, because
Sure.
this is, about the internal relationship. So everyone benefits from it, but then especially people who are highly self-critical or, feel shame really frequently. So, and of course, that's the hardest to do self-compassion. So, and the thing for those people too is when people start practicing self-compassion, it's easy to get discouraged because, like you said before, it's just like, well, I'm not believing it or it doesn't feel right. We resist it a lot. And so we can assume like it doesn't work or I'm not deserving of it, or else wouldn't I be open to it if I actually deserved it? But the more self-critical we are, it just means we have to be patient and gentle with ourselves when practicing self-compassion, because love will start being a trigger for fear. So, and a lot of people, if there's trauma too, or a religion where you're like, I was fully accepted and loved, but love actually looked like a lot of abuse. Like it's actually pretty terrifying then when you try to turn that gentleness and kindness and love towards yourself. Because even though, as we talk about, it's like, no, that sounds like that'd be great, right? But it's like, oh no, if the brain has started to distrust love and what it looks like, then it's going to distrust it when it's coming from you as well. And so for those people, it's just a matter of being really patient and really gentle with it, kind of microdosing your self-compassion, because your safety mechanism inside is going to be like, no, get away, because love is bad. We can't trust it. And so you kind of have to work on building that relationship with yourself of like, I might be a safe person you can trust. I know you haven't been able to trust anyone else and there's been abuse or you felt abandoned or, but I'm still going to be here. So I think that's just really want to emphasize that, because so many times people want to practice self-compassion, but then it feels bad because they're just like, oh, this is icky. And a lot of pain comes up for people too, because the first time they really like provide that for themselves and get this sense of like, oh my gosh, I'm cared for, it floods them with all the reminders of how much they haven't felt cared for.
Sure.
They
Yeah.
they remember all this like time lost, and they're just like, oh my gosh, like it's bringing it into clear view. I have felt unloved forever, maybe. And so it's really kind of scary. But that's why kind of taking it slow and being patient with it and not letting the fact that it's so foreign and a little uncomfortable trick you into thinking, oh, then it's bad for me.
Right. Yeah, I really like Christopher Germer's idea of backdraft here.
Yes.
The notion that you have like a burning building that has like no more oxygen left in the room, and you go in to rush to like save the fire or to put the fire out, and as you open the door, all of a sudden it's flooded with like your focus and attention, and these things that you've been maybe avoiding thinking about have like this burst of oxygen or attention. And it can kind of blow back on you a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. And that terrifies people because they're like, okay, well, I don't love myself and that hurts. I tried to love myself and that fucking hurts too. Okay, so I'm hopeless. And it's like, oh no,
So
no, it was
everything hurts.
Yeah, it's like, no, it was just a lot. Don't worry. It's just you need time to kind of adjust and keep practicing it. And so yeah, that's what I always want to like emphasize, is that it can feel difficult a little bit, especially if you've had an environment you've grown up in or any trauma that's kind of taught you that to be cared for isn't safe.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know we don't have the opportunity to offer like a full therapy session here on the podcast, but are there any ideas you'd like to impress upon the audience about maybe the usefulness or a healthy relationship with shame, or the self-esteem model, and how this like evaluativeness or this self-judgment can be useful and unuseful? What could you say about all that?
Yeah, with the shame, like when we feel it, it's fine to be curious about it, because sometimes shame does let us know, hey, you're acting against your values. And it's like, all right, thank you for the heads up. Appreciate that. But to stay in that place, it doesn't serve you at all, because there's always a hierarchy. You're either on top or bottom, or, but it's like, you don't get to ever be grounded if you're like proving yourself like, oh, good, I'm finally a good person. Now I did it. It's like, okay, until what, the next thing that now you're afraid you've fallen from grace. And, so it's so up and down if you keep trying to aspire to some ideal self, some level of perfection, so it's an exhausting ride if you keep using the, like, my good, bad, that self-esteem shame model. Like, it just I don't know. It's exhausting. Like, yeah, it'll motivate
Yeah.
you sometimes. You'll do stuff. I'm not saying that we don't get shit done when we're mad at ourselves. Like, it can work, but it's just not going to be the sustainable path. And also, it's like it's not your fault too that you feel shame. I just like that being a
Mm.
reminder. Like, it's not your fault. Who you are is not your fault. It's your responsibility to figure out what am I going to do with this. But it's not your fault at any point for these different ways that you suffer.
I like that distinction between like fault and responsibility.
Mm.
And, as Gus Fring said, I don't find fear to be an effective motivator. Like that
Mhm.
beating yourself into
Yeah.
submission just doesn't get it. Uh,
Mhm.
but when we're talking about shame, we're talking about, loving ourselves. How does that show up in our romantic relationships, for instance?
Yeah, well, I think when we have so much shame, like what shame needs to survive is a lot of secrecy, right? And like darkness and defensiveness and ego stories and all of that. And so to to have compassion for ourselves and kind of try and release some of that shame means we can actually show up in a relationship, right? If I'm
Mm.
ashamed of all the parts of who I am, then I'm going to be performing in a relationship or convincing someone to love me, or quick to defensiveness if a partner says just the slightest thing that hits that deep nerve where I'm like, well, I hate that part of myself. Now they said this, we freak out because it's just been buried so deep. Versus if we have that compassion for like, oh, what if this struggle of mine isn't my failing? What if this is just
Mm.
an aspect of what it's like to be me right now? What if this is just my humanity, not my dysfunction or failing? What would it look like if this just got to exist? Then we get to actually communicate with our partners, right? We get to know what we are needing, what we're feeling. We get to express
Instead of
that stuff.
covering up those deficits or those places that are hard.
Yeah, and we know when we're hurting too, and can actually request that from a partner, right? If I have a lot of shame around something and then I'm triggered, it's easy for me to be like, what I need is for you to fuck off and never talk to me. It's like, but what if I didn't have shame there and I knew what I needed was something a little bit different, right? So the more we can sit with ourselves, have that compassion, we just get more in tune with those needs. We can express that to our partner, and it's healthier for both people because we're coming
Mm.
from that more authentic state of meeting each other's needs versus meeting each other's defensive reactions to shame protection,
Yeah, yeah. Meeting each other authentically rather than like meeting each other's sort of polished personas that aren't
Mhm.
all that accurate.
Yeah.
I I work with a lot of clients who have come out of a faith system where maybe they got married super super young, or they
Mhm.
were taught these uh, I kiss dating goodbye ideas about courtship, and now they
Mhm.
are in their 30s and they've never really dated. And the thing I see over and over and over again is this desire to like, how do I impress them? How do I get the phone number? How do I get the second date? Without
Mhm.
ever actually stopping to ask, like, do I want a second date? Like, am I even
Yeah.
having fun? When we're trying so hard to like keep up appearances in that way, rather than
Mhm.
just sort of accepting ourselves as we are, we
Mhm.
forget to ask whether or not we even want to be there.
I love that's such a great point because truly what we're doing is saying, am I lovable? So it's like, yeah,
Yeah.
I'm not going to
Am I the
stop and
type
ask
of person
questions.
that can be loved?
Yeah, so it wouldn't serve us to really pause and think, are they what I want? How do I feel
Mm,
about this? It's like, well, if my priority is to fill this deep void inside, because when I look at myself, I don't really believe I'm lovable, then of course we're going to do whatever to try and just get that love. And so we're going to forget that we're a person who's allowed to actually have our own standards or interests or wants, or like that
yeah.
goes out the window because we're like, well, step number one, someone tell me I'm lovable. Dear God, someone tell me I'm lovable,
That's
because
the
I'm
only thing
terrified
that
that I'm
I'm
not.
looking for. Yeah.
Yeah. So then obviously, right, with the self-compassion, it's like when you look at yourself, you're like, oh, of course you are. Not
Mm.
because I'm looking at the pros and cons list of who you are and there's enough pros. So okay, cool, you're lovable. It's like, no, you are. You're a human being in this world and deserving of it because you exist. So you're lovable. So once that's already secured, it is just so much easier to be healthy in a relationship, to yeah, date and actually be like, what do I think of this person, versus that desperate need we all have of like the checkbox of someone make me feel safe. It's like, oh, if we can help ourselves feel safe, how much freer we can be in so many other facets of our life.
Mm. Yeah, well, then, how do these ideas around shame and self-compassion and everything else change our relationships with like our bodies or our sexuality?
Yeah, body, sexuality, right? Always such a that's a tough one with self-compassion, so important, and
So much shame there, right? Yeah,
it's
there's
so
so many
hard. It's just
opportunities to beat yourself up or tell yourself that you're
yeah.
wrong. And if I just am the right sexual person or the right sexual orientation or I have the
Mhm.
right kinks or interests, then maybe I'll be loved.
Exactly. Yeah, it's just ooh, shame, love, sex, just a hotbed there. But yeah, I think one thing too is like normalizing the fact that you don't have to like love yourself. That sounds really contradictory, but I feel that there could be this emphasis on like if I look in the mirror or something and I point out some flaw in myself that we can be quick to beat ourselves up for like you're supposed to love yourself. You're supposed to look in the mirror and be like, no, I love all of that. And it's like, but we're
I'm good enough.
also
I'm smart enough. And doggone it, people like me.
exactly. But it's okay and it's totally normal for us to see flaws within ourselves. I'm not saying there actually are flaws, but this we're tribal people. We're supposed to be looking around and being like, what's acceptable, it's not acceptable. I've got to make sure I still belong, I still fit. So we're wired to do that. So I think people need to be really gentle and compassionate with the part of themselves that initially does notice anything that seems atypical and label it a flaw. It's
Mm.
like, well, that's just you like trying to survive in the tribe, right? If my tribe, everyone looks a very specific way and I look different, that could affect my survival. So of course we're gonna have that comparison and kind of scan ourselves for like, is there something wrong with me that's gonna make me not belong? So even having compassion for like, oh, that's the part of you that's being well. That's not the part of you that hates yourself. Don't let any of that like self-critique make you automatically assume then, oh, you must hate yourself. It's like, no, you're a tribal person. So this is what we do. But then being able to look at it as like, oh, I'm only labeling that a flaw because of what society is telling me, because of these
Hmm.
stories. This is actually perfectly fine as it is. This is who I am in this moment. This is what it is. This whatever my body looks like, whatever my body is feeling like in any given moment, however it's responding or not responding in different ways. It's like, okay, this is my body doing its best to be as well as it can be in this moment right now. And so trying to have love for that part of you that's like working so hard, even the parts that we're quick to label like, well, that's the dysfunctional part of my body or
That's the
whatever.
part
It's
that's
like,
broken.
yeah, it's like, oh, that's the part that is working so hard, like it is working so, so hard to be okay and to be well and to help you thrive. And it's okay to be frustrated sometimes with things, but that doesn't mean, yeah, there's your broken part, there's your unlovable part. And honestly, it's the way we treat those things that we deem like, our broken selves, like that's what ends up interfering most with intimacy. It's not actually the thing, whatever it
Mm-hmm.
is, right?
How
It's
we
the way,
feel about the thing.
yeah, it's how we're interacting with it. If it's like, say someone can, you can only come in one position, but you've got this story in your head of like, well, but that's not normal people. It can be different. And so you
Mm-hmm.
respond to that story by saying, well, then I'll just keep acting like normal people act. And, or I'll just fake it and pretend, or oh God, it's horrible. It'll be so shameful if I share that. It's like all this stuff. It's like, that's the stuff that's making you now feel disconnected from a partner. It's not actually the thing, it's like,
Mm.
so if you have that care for yourself and you don't see it as like, oh yeah, remember that's the broken part of you. You're like, oh, that's my body's response right now. Got it. Thank you, body, for giving me that information. What would support me in this moment? Maybe it's talking to my partner about something or changing position or saying, I think I'd like to just stop for now. Like you're allowed to ask those questions of yourself of what do I need? Because you're coming from that place of I'm not broken. This is what's going on right now. What would be the most supportive thing for this experience? So the thing, yeah, that we demonize so much within ourselves, like it really isn't the culprit as much as we keep trying to think that it is.
Yeah, I really love that model. I've always kind of believed that probably 10% of our problems can be dealt with by dealing with them. And a full on, like another 80 or 90% of our problems are because we are trying to fix the other 10% that can't be fixed or that can't be
Mhm.
like dealt with. And we just need to find a little bit of acceptance because 80% of our stress is just resistance to things that we could probably cope with if we just gave ourselves permission to like work around them.
Yeah, exactly. And like thinking of that example too, if it's in a sexual situation, like that someone could walk away from that if it's, say it's like, oh, they can't orgasm unless something's very specific way. Like say they don't express that to a partner or partners and they're just like fighting the experience or just keeping it private and feeling shitty or whatever. And then the sexual experience ends. They walk away from that, reinforcing this idea of it's the fact that I'm particular in this way that is what led to that being an uncomfortable experience yet again. And then the
Mhm.
next time they keep going with that and they keep believing, see, the thing that was stressing me out, it is bad because look, it's taking over. Now it's all I can think about. And it's like clearly my dysfunction when it's like, oh, but what if it is the way you related to it? What if you embrace that and realize, oh, this is my body doing what my body does. Cool. Thanks, body, for letting me know what's up. Okay. Like it just gets to play out so differently because you're not moralizing all these different little things about yourself or about an interaction. So I think it's just so easy for us to start believing these stories because we don't actually stop to think, oh, maybe I'm actually the one making it worse. We keep
Mm.
thinking, oh, it's my body, it's my sexual organs, it's my sexuality, and it's this, it's that. It's like maybe those things are actually fine. you know Maybe you're just not respecting them in the way that they're desperately begging you to respect them.
Yeah, so you're saying it's human to have these types of judgments,
Mhm.
but to relate to them like mindfully and compassionately is to
Yeah.
kind of ask ourselves like, well, what does this judgment mean? Is it useful? Should I
Mhm.
be that critical? Or if there is a concern, like, can I do something about it rather than like punishing myself for it or
Mhm.
overly evaluating and measuring it?
Yeah, exactly. Because if we're punishing ourselves from it, we are then disconnected from ourselves and from anyone else in our lives. Like
Mm.
punishment has never led to greater connection ever, ever. Right? I mean, I, I would love an example where someone got to be closer because of a punishment that they endured. And so, yeah, it is this like full acceptance of, and especially if it's with sex or bodies, of like, whatever is here, and there's space for it, and it is perfectly right because it is showing up. Like it's here, and so I will allow it. Your permission to be here. It's not a, is this one allowed? Well, I didn't want this part to be here. I really wish it was this part. So da, da, da. It's like, no, anything that shows up or doesn't show up gets to be totally fair and how the moment was supposed to be,
Mm.
instead of just like finding every little thing of like, oh, well, that's where that moment went wrong. And that's where my body went wrong again. And that it's just like, oh, no, that's what your body did. And then that's what your body did. And okay, now let's follow it along. What does your body want and need? And you just keep going off of that, what is helpful, like you're saying. It's using the like workability strategy instead of the very punitive moral, like who's good or bad in the situation.
Yeah, it's utilitarian in that way, which I
Mhm,
really
mhm,
appreciate.
mhm.
But I could keep just asking you these questions all night, but I do have a couple of callers on the line. So if it's all right
Okay.
with you, I'd like to check in with Jeff in Louisiana, who I suppose is interested to learn a little bit more about all of this. Jeff, what can we do for you tonight?
Hey, y'all. So, first of all, I just want to say I really appreciate the conversation. It's definitely resonating with me a lot, and also just hearing y'all talk about it kind of normalizes my experience because I think y'all mentioned earlier in the call that we kind of imagine, a lot of people imagine that if we're self-critical, it's only going on in our lives and no one else's. And I definitely do that to myself a lot of the time. So yeah, just hearing the conversation, it's been great. And my questions were, first of all, I'm just looking for some resources. I live in Louisiana, and I've seen a few different therapists here and haven't really found any that seem to to really do what y'all are talking about, it's like either a lot of just general talk therapy or CBT, and not really like emotional focused, self-acceptance sort of stuff. So I was wondering if y'all had any recommendations on maybe different search terms to search for when looking for a therapist, and also any like resources as far as books and courses and whatnot.
Yeah, well, I couldn't recommend a particular therapist for you there in Louisiana, but I'll definitely say that in this like modern age of telemedicine, you really should have the entire state to draw from, and a lot of opportunities to find a good compassion-based therapist. In terms of like books and resources, I'll say that in the show notes to this episode, I've got a great collection of things. I, of course, want to mention resources like the Secular Therapy Project, as well as Recovering from Religion, that may be able to give you a little bit more specifics about how to find a good therapist in your area. But all that general stuff aside, Callye, was there anything in particular that you wanted to mention here?
No, I mean, I think you're right with when you're searching for therapists, like even doing self-compassion therapy, Louisiana or whatever, like using those terms will be really great. And also just appreciate you calling in, and that being able to see that like this is more normal than you thought, because that's what happens so often with clients. Because a lot of the people we see, people are well. Like, I mean, I guess some still may have a stigma that like therapy is, oh, well, the people that are coming in, it's like because they've got the issues. It's like, no, these are all normal people that are in therapy, and they all feel they are completely alone in their self-criticism. Like some of the people that seem like the most positive ones, or they have their life together, or, that we would, if we met them outside of that, we'd be like, oh gosh, I want to be more like them. It's like, those are the people that are sitting there saying, I don't like myself, and I'm the harshest critic to myself every day. All I do is play out thoughts of how I'm not good enough, and I don't know if I'm lovable. And so I'm glad that you could feel less alone in that, because it truly is the experience of all people we see in therapies. Everyone thinks like it must just be me, like I'm this one bad person that can't figure it out. It's like, oh no, this is a shared human experience. Like we're all going through it. So, and I've got some book recommendations, but I'd probably include at the show notes too. But I mean, I'll just say one of them that is my favorite is The Mindful Path to Self-Compassion by Christopher Germer. Like that's just my favorite one, as I think it's good for clinicians too, but that I recommend to all clients because it's so accessible and it has exercises, but it helps with the understanding. So that's my like favorite go-to book to start with. But yeah, I'd be happy to share more of those resources too in the notes.
Great. So you can find all of that in the bottom of the episode. I didn't mean to interrupt you, Jeff. I wanted to see if there was anything else that was on your mind that we could help with.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. And then I guess one thing that's also been kind of new for me in this talk is not that the goal isn't to, it sounds like the goal isn't to like accept yourself always. It's to have compassion for yourself when you can't accept yourself, which that was kind of like a mind or an eye-opening aspect that I took away from the talk. So if y'all want to talk more about that, I'd love to hear it. But otherwise, that's all the questions I have. And thank y'all again.
Yeah, no, we'll keep the conversation going, but I really appreciate you reaching out, and I do hope that you'll check out that website and get some of that information, and do what you can. I recognize that it can be really miserable trying to find the right therapist for you, and trying to find the bravery to start that relationship and deal with the paperwork and deal with the emails and deal with the scheduling. So good on you and good luck. Please feel free to shoot us an email if there's anything that we can help with.
Yeah, and
all right, sounds good. Thank y'all. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm here.
Well, and I want to, I hope he's still listening. That point about acceptance, and I think, did you say it kind of is like maybe not accepting yourself all the time? Like I want to highlight that with self-compassion, it is saying, no, we do accept ourselves all the time. And we can also be critical of ourselves in a constructive problem-solving way. We accept ourselves, even if we make a mistake. We're like, I still accept, I'm not a bad person for that, but I am going to pay attention to what did I do? And maybe that's not what I want to keep doing. Maybe that wasn't the best choice for me to make. So there's a lot of discernment that still gets to happen with that. So just for people to remember that, like, self-acceptance is always there, but you do get to call yourself out plenty of times to be like, hey, I don't know if that was, what was
Yeah, it's
best
not
for
just
us.
cutting yourself slack, it is
Mhm.
creating opportunities for you to actually work on some of these things.
Yes.
But to Jeff's point, I think there is also sort of a mindfulness component to all of this. Like when you there's a exercise that's pretty common in the mindfulness community. There's a version of it on my website for folks who are interested. But when you take a minute for yourself and you just sort of like focus on your breathing and you really work to be mindful and to just attach your focus to your breathing, you can set a timer for about 60 seconds. And all I'm going to think about is my breathing. I watch it go in and I watch it go out. And then your mind starts to wander. And then oftentimes people think, well, fuck, I can't even focus on my breathing for 60 seconds. Like, what kind of fool am I that I can't do this? You're missing the point of the exercise. The whole notion isn't that you would be able to focus on your breathing. The whole notion of the exercise is that you would be able to notice yourself getting distracted and then bring it back. And so it's not necessarily, at least from a certain point of view, that we accept ourselves all the time, but that when we are being unaccepting, that when we are resisting ourselves, that we become aware of it and then just give ourselves permission to like gently come back into focus and to begin to applaud ourselves as we are, even as we're working to grow and change. Is all of that
Mhm.
fair to say?
Yeah, totally. I think because it's self-compassion, it is big enough to handle your setbacks, your disappointments, your successes. Like, it's got space for all those parts of you to show up. And I love that with that example because of, it being about returning back to the breath, kind of noticing. It's like same with self-compassion. It's about what place do you want to return back to within yourself so that you can continue on, right? If I grew up and, like, say I've got one parent and it's like, that's the loving home. And then I've got the other one over here that's not, it's like, we want to go back to the loving home, like if we're really struggling, it's like, okay, I'm going to go to the place that I know has got me, even when I feel like I'm at my worst, I'm going to be taken care of. And so it's about developing that within ourselves of like, oh, I want to be that safe home that's always there to return back to in those moments of need. And again, like you pointed out before too, and with the religion and morality, it's like you don't have to earn it. There's nothing to prove. Like, we deserve compassion just because we exist. It's like if we saw a patch of grass that was just like dry, we wouldn't be like, wow, that grass must be the most unlovable grass. And what's wrong with it? You're awful because it looks like you're dying over there. So you must be really bad. No, we'd be like, oh, that grass isn't getting enough water. Like, it's pretty straightforward, and
Just
we'd know.
give it the thing that it needs rather
Yeah,
than judging it for not already having the thing that it needs.
exactly. But with ourselves, we're like, well, life isn't going well. So I'm bad. Okay, let me go through all the list of reasons why I know I'm bad and why the world has reminded me I'm bad. And okay, I do deserve all the pain that I'm experiencing. Therefore, I do not deserve love and care because I am at my core the culprit of everything that is wrong. So yes, I'm bad and don't deserve anything. It's like, okay, that is a lot of meaning we've just made out of something when really you are just a human that exists on this planet, and we all deserve the things we need in order to keep surviving. And we all need care and love and support. So you deserve it because you happen to be here. Like, you're alive. This is just how it works, So you're not bad just because you're struggling. In the same way, yeah, the grass isn't bad just because it happened to be in a place that isn't getting as much water as other places.
Mm. Well, are there any particular like techniques or exercises or even just mantras or frameworks or anything in particular that the audience might be able to take away from this conversation?
Yeah, well, one thing, and maybe it's not a technique, but just like a mental shift and thing to be aware of is that if you go to a default place of shame or self-criticism, there's a good chance like it's a pretty familiar voice, right? It's got like some greatest hits, and that all roads lead back to that same voice. So I don't know about you, but like I'd be pretty suspicious of anyone who told me the same thing about myself every day, no matter what was going on. You know, like it's like, I don't know how wise that voice is, because a lot of times we confuse the intensity of like how much we don't like ourselves or how bad we feel. We're like, if I feel it this intensely, that must mean there's some wisdom here. Why would I feel so bad unless I was needing
Follow
to hear
those
this
strong
message?
emotions. They're telling you something.
Yeah. And so we confuse it because it's so intense. We think it must mean something, but it's like, oh no, it's intense because this is a habitual pattern. And so the fact that it's so familiar should make you very, very suspicious of it and realize maybe it's not so wise. So I think I just want to like put that out there as a thing to keep in mind, because sometimes we struggle to be compassionate towards ourselves because we're like, yeah, that sounds great, but you don't understand how smart that voice sounds that tells me I'm bad. Like, I think it really knows what it's talking about. And it's like, oh, I don't think it does. If every conclusion it has about you is the same thing, no matter what new data comes in, it doesn't sound super smart to me, you know? So yeah, want people to be suspicious of that critical voice they have.
Sometimes reputations outlive their applications. If you're not like checking in from time to time, it's probably not all that accurate.
Yes. Yeah. I think a good question a person can ask themselves is, if I knew this feeling was normal, how would I react? Because sometimes we will get caught up in that judging ourselves of like, well, should I be feeling this way? Maybe I'm too sensitive. Maybe that, well, I'm overreacting. Well, I don't like, we first want to justify whether we're allowed to have the experience we're having. And so we wait to justify it before we let ourselves react, or, you know, however we do. And that's a lot of invalidation that ends up happening, right? We're shaming ourselves for it. So if we were to say, okay, whatever feeling just hit me, this is the appropriate reaction. This is normal. Other people would feel this way. Then does it free you up to engage differently? So I think that's just a helpful like question to always ask yourself whenever you
tapping
have
into
a
that
feeling.
common humanity piece.
Yeah, yeah.
Allowing yourself to just be a person rather than like a super person who never has angry thoughts or never does anything wrong or anything else.
Yeah, because a lot of people will spend their time being like, well, but I shouldn't feel this way. It's like, well, you do. So we're going to need to go ahead and just like, it is what it is. Yeah. So really normalizing your feeling or thought as soon as it hits. So you don't have to waste extra energy trying to decide, am I allowed to or not? It's like, it's here, so it's real. So let's honor it and, you know, go from there. I think another technique that I like is when you create like a name for your inner critic, or if it's some, you know, old voice that you hear, the really harsh voice, like giving it a name so that you can properly identify it when it's showing up. So if it's like Tammy, I don't know, right? If I'm just like,
I like personally worked with a therapist as a client who referred to all of her negative thoughts as Harold, and something about that name just stuck with me so deeply.
I love that. It's so sophisticated.
Yeah.
Too. Like it's like messy but sophisticated. I don't know. But yeah, but give it a name so that you can really call it what it is and externalize it a little bit, so that it's, you know, when you find yourself being hard on yourself or whatever, being like, oh, okay, Tammy, I hear you. Oh, thank you. You know, and letting it be there and not being mad at it, not like, oh, God damn it, here it is again. I'm so tired of having to be critical. I hate this voice. It's like, oh, of course that voice is going to show up. Why would it not? It thinks it's taking care of you. When you're hard on yourself and feel bad, it's a version of you trying to protect yourself. So you don't need to go to war with it and try and defeat it. It's just like, oh yeah, you're showing up because you're thinking that the way you share things is going to help me do better in the future. We're going to do it differently today, but I appreciate that you wanted to come in and help. So giving it a name so that it's got this place to live where it's like, oh, there you are. Okay, got it. Thanks, but no thanks. Going to sit you down over here and continue on. So it's this really like neutral relationship with it. So I like naming it a lot so that you can keep recognizing it when it's happening and create that separation. Because a lot of times, I mean, it's all inner dialogue. right? We're all just like talking to ourselves and we don't know what's what. So when you can pause and be like, oh, that's the critical voice talking. Okay, got it. It helps to be able to kind of distinguish it so that we can more easily catch it as it continues to happen.
Yeah, and just remembering that you're allowed to listen to it. That's not the same thing as obeying it. Like
Yes,
you're
exactly.
allowed to, turn towards some of those painful thoughts without
Hmm.
necessarily them being you or being true.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And
Well,
then,
before we,
yeah.
I didn't want to cut off your
Oh,
thought. I
yeah.
did want to ask before we
Mhm.
wrap up tonight if we could take one more call.
Oh, I'd love
But
that.
before we
Mhm.
do, did you have anything else to add?
Let's see. I think, well, inner child work, that's a thing. Getting in touch with your younger self is a good practice to try and go back to that really innocent version to be like, oh, I did deserve so much care that I never received.
Hmm.
So, and there's different ways, like people can go online to have guided versions of that. So, just any inner child work I think is good. And just the main question with self compassion each day is being like, what do I need right now? So, I think that's just a good question for people to like have in their pocket as when all else fails, when you're struggling, when you're despairing, when you just don't know like how to get through an emotion, just stopping and saying, what do I need? As just what's the thing that would give me a little bit of care in this moment instead of how do I fix myself? Well, what's going to make this? It's just like, what do I need right now? So I think that's a really good question to always have.
Yeah, and then I'll just throw in really quickly for our audience that if you are interested in some of that inner child work, particularly around issues of religious trauma, "Leaving the Fold" by Marlene Winnell is a really great piece that includes a lot of that type of work. So I definitely encourage people to check that out. But in the meantime, let's touch base with Norman in Connecticut before we wrap up for the night. Norman, what's on your mind?
Hello. Um, yeah, I wanted to explore. Well, I thought you guys might have some like valuable commentary on. So, like, I had an early sexual experience, and I think that it pertains a lot to like shame and secrecy, like ethical issues, and how we think of children and sexuality, and like understanding and supporting youth in having a healthy life.
Hmm. Yeah. What kinds of questions did you have, or what kind of experience did you want to share with us?
Yeah, so I guess like I like had I like basically like did soaking when I was in like third grade with another third grader.
Mm.
If you're
Okay.
familiar with like that idea, and I'm just like I guess I don't know like it's hard to like that's like a thing that brings up like a lot of like shame, I guess, but also like is it like how do we think about consent between kids that young? Like I think that both of us like agreed and everything, but like it's a big topic, or it like just I thought you might have some like general thoughts on how to put that into context.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you at this stage of life, do you have any maybe unfinished business here? Does it feel like this is a memory that you are struggling to maybe know what to do with, or how to contextualize? Or talk to me about maybe what your distress looks like here. Is there anything uncomfortable about this story or about these ideas that are specific to you rather than
Not
maybe
really for
how
me,
like
but
our
I think
culture
that
might frame it?
yeah, I think that I'm not particularly caught up about it, but it's not really something that I ever share with anyone or like talk about, because it's just yeah, like people will think that kids don't have any sexual curiosity. It's like that's a big issue in our society, and I don't know. I kind of wish it hadn't happened, but um,
Sure.
it's not.
And
It's not like
I
a
hear you.
issue. I think it worked out fine.
Yeah. And I hear you when you say that, maybe you wish that it hadn't happened. And I get that. We do live in a society that likes to think that children have no interest or curiosity in their bodies, or that children don't have like any form of sexuality, when that's just obviously not the case. I think in context of like tonight's conversation, it's worthwhile to have a sense of self-compassion here, to recognize that children are children, that bodies are bodies, that kids are going to be curious, that these are like healthy and natural processes. If there is something about that experience that kind of lingers with you, or brings out a sense of shame, it might be worth being curious, like, where does that shame come from and how is it serving you? Like, what good does that feeling do in your life? Because perhaps it does have something to say. Whether or not its opinion is worth like obeying is a different question from whether or not it's worth listening to. But Callye, is there anything that you might want to add here?
No, I mean, I think that's a great point, and I'm glad that there's some normalization that you have around it too. Like, kids are sexual, they explore, there's curiosity, that it's these things you happen. I'd say with the self-compassion piece, that sometimes we need to let ourselves grieve, even if we feel like we're okay with something. Sometimes we can be like, okay, I can make sense of it. Blah, blah, blah. All right, good, I'm fine. But just to maybe check in with yourself, or for other people to check in with issues that they're like, it's fine. I get it, but that still kind of linger, is kind of sitting with like, maybe there's some sadness there. Maybe there is pain. Maybe I make total sense of it. Maybe I'm not actively judging it. Maybe there's not that like, oh, I'm shaming myself for doing that, but maybe there's some discomfort there. And so it's worth just sitting with what it feels like, this idea of a loss of innocence, of it. Like, all these concepts that come up can feel kind of heavy. So even as adults, there's a lot of stuff that I think we understand fully, and we're like, no, I don't have, like, it's fine. I get it. But that there can still be a younger part of ourselves that is like, but I didn't get it at the time, And so it can be helpful sometimes to go and sit with that younger self, with that experience of like, what does that feel like, and to have that capacity to really hold whatever comes up, so that it gets to really feel seen and heard and like fully processed in that way. And not saying that it's not processed with you, but I think a lot of us can do that in our lives with a bunch of stuff where we're like, well, I get it. It was fine. It happened. Da, 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 and I'm good. And it's
I shouldn't be stressed out by this, therefore I'm
Yeah.
not stressed out by
Yeah,
this.
exactly. Like, we get it. Therefore, there's no complicated feelings. And it's like, oh, but we can get stuff, but maybe we never gave ourselves permission to feel all the complexity of feelings that did happen there. And so being gentle with ourselves, say, hey, I'm going to feel all this stuff and not judge it, not, be scared of all these feelings that are coming up, but I'm going to give it time to really be there to see if it needs anything from me.
Norman, how does all that strike you?
Yeah. I think that it's important to, try to get to it. Yeah, get to how you feel emotionally about. I think, a lot of times I tend to be very analytical about everything, and I don't. I get kind of maybe like on the alexithymic kind of vibe, where I'm not fully like. I tend to like analyze things instead of just like feeling them.
Sure. Yeah, and the book that Callye mentioned, the Mindful Path to Self-Compassion, I think may have something to teach you here, because there is a lot of really great material about how to use mindfulness, about how to use sort of your thought life and your intellect to connect with an emotional experience, to connect with like a somatic or a bodily experience. And if this is something that you are curious about, or maybe wanting to change about yourself, or a place that you're looking to grow, that would be a really great place for you to start.
All right.
But I really appreciate you sharing your story with us tonight. Was there anything else I might be able to help point you towards?
Not at this time, I guess.
Great.
Yeah, I
Well,
love the
thank
show.
you so much for giving us a call. Super glad to hear it. Thanks so much.
Appreciate him sharing that story. I love the vulnerability people are able to bring to this show, you know?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Because it really is worth noting how uncomfortable that
Mhm.
idea tends to make us as a society. We
Mhm.
absolutely want to assume that children never would get into such an occurrence.
Mhm.
And I think oftentimes without meaning to, the real problem, like we talked about with resistance earlier, is not the children who are curious and exploring, it's the
Mhm.
shame that they are met with. And
Yeah.
that's true for children learning to masturbate. That is true for
Mhm.
children who are looking to explore their bodies. So often we can, as parents or just as adults in the world, introduce them to a lot of shame that can really haunt people. So I hope that
Yeah.
they are finding great professionals like you and finding ways out of that unnecessary or unhelpful emotion.
Mm. Yeah, I love something he said too about being an analytical person and how that's so many of us were good thinkers, you know, and so we
Mm,
know how to make things right within ourselves, sort of. We know how to be okay. And we do a disservice to ourselves sometimes because we forget that maybe we shouldn't be okay. Yes, big
mm,
picture, we want to be able to handle stuff, but if we keep trying to strive towards how can I make this okay? How can I make this okay? It's like, oh, but what if there's a bunch of neglected parts of you that actually needed time to be very not okay?
yeah.
and and have ourselves be with ourselves, right? Compassionately of like, I've got the space for you to be all types of not okay because I didn't feel okay. So like, let's honor that, you know, but we're so quick to want to be like, okay, yeah, but how do I get it into the okay place again? Let's process it. Let's move through it. Let's move through it. And it's like, that is great, but we're supposed to not be okay when we're not okay. And I think a lot of us are afraid to feel our not okayness because it's like, well, but then I just get stuck in that and it's bad. And it's like, oh no, no, it's gonna free you up. Like that part of you wants to be seen so desperately. And so it's such a gift to be able to meet these scared, fearful, shameful, not okay parts with this kind of embrace of like, you can be here and you're not gonna overpower us. Like be not okay. I want you to be not okay so that you get to actually express what you need. So yeah, just love that he pointed that out because I think a lot of clients and people do that is we're just like, how do I get through this already? When it's
Hmm.
like, well, maybe it's supposed to feel bad. Like
Can't
maybe
go over
something.
it, can't go
Yeah.
under it, can't go around it. Like you gotta
Mhm,
feel your
mhm.
feelings.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well said. Well, with that thought, are there any like final words that you'd like to leave with the audience or just last impressions about our conversation tonight?
Oh, goodness. I have so many words, but no, I think everything's covered. I mean, I think it's a great, just self compassion is a great practice because it affects literally every part of our life, right? The relationship with ourself is the one that we're always going to have for our whole life, right? So we want it to be a helpful one as much as possible. So I love that this is a thing people are getting more into and just want to like keep encouraging people that this is a new way of relating to yourself, not just all right, I'm going to do some self-compassion at myself. You know, it's like,
Yeah,
no,
it's not
no,
like
this
a single exercise or like just a
Mhm,
skill. I mean, yes,
mhm,
those things help us get there, but we're
exactly.
really looking to change the way that we think about ourselves.
Yeah, it is about relationships with self, others, all of that. So seeing it as this new practice to engage in and to really be patient with yourself and know that you do deserve care, even if parts of you are like, "Ugh, I don't." It's like you do, you know, like just keep going off of that and keep experimenting with this idea of like, okay, what would it be like if I did deserve care? You know, like play around with it to give yourself the opportunity to finally start receiving what you've so desperately longed for, probably from as long as you've been alive, you know? So I just really hope people see the merits of it and really want to take it on as this practice and that they don't give up too soon because they're like, well, it was hard or I I didn't believe it when I told myself, you know, that I love myself. It's like it's okay, you know. It takes time to build that new internal relationship.
Mm, beautiful. Well, thank you so much for being here tonight and for walking us through all of this. I want to make sure to let people know where they can find you. Where are you out on the web?
Yeah, well, I am just my website is mindfulaustin therapy.com. I don't have any other things, or like, I mean, I have personal social media stuff, but that's the main thing for my practice. So yeah, I love all things mindfulness and self-compassion, and this was so fun, and I'm excited that I got to be a guest and got to connect with everyone about this.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I want to take a quick moment to remind everybody that if they are interested not just in secular sexuality, but in all the shows on the Atheist Experience Network, you can get them all in one convenient place. That's tiny.cc/AEN podcast, where you can find a audio version of all of these programs. I also want to encourage people to keep this conversation going, to check out the Secular Sexuality fan group on Facebook, where you can find a lot of the resources that we've been talking about, as well as my dumbass opinions about tons of subjects, because I spend way too much time in that group. I hope to bump into you there. And if you are watching this show live on YouTube on the 16th, immediately after this, we are going to drop into the atheist community of Discord. That's a 24-hour service. You can always connect with other folks that love the ACA at tiny.cc/ACD Discord. And then, of course, I want to mention our merchandising at tiny.cc/merchaca, where you can find a number of t-shirts. We're going to have to put together some sort of campaign around be the porn you want to see in the world. See if we can't get something like that up there. But now for the most important part of the night, I want to absolutely thank our incredible crew who, even through all of these holidays with all of the extra work and all the different things going on, have been able to make us look so good tonight. Thank you all so much for all of your hard work and everything you do. And Callye, I just want to say it one more time. I have absolutely loved this conversation. I've been so appreciative to have you on tonight. And yeah, appreciate you being here.
Thanks. This has been great.
Mm-hmm. And with that thought, I guess I just want to encourage everybody listening to show themselves a little bit of compassion, maybe show themselves a little bit of romance, maybe show themselves a little bit of love, to take a quiet moment for themselves and give themselves a big old orgasm. Or better yet, give somebody else one.
Watch the Atheist Experience live Sundays at 4:30 p.m. Central. Visit tiny.cc/YTAXP and call into the show at 512-991-9242 or connect to the show online at tiny.cc/CallAXP.